good afternoon, and evening, depending on where you're at. Welcome to the August 14th update on the tropics here. As always, these thoughts are mine alone, and in making decisions regarding the two systems that we're going to be discussing today, please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local weather office, and your local authorities for all the latest information pertaining to your area. Well, here we are with Fred, that is now a remnant tropical system here, and then we have newly designated Tropical Storm Grace here, zooming towards Puerto Rico here. We're going to talk about Fred first, and let's get right into the system here. You can see that our system is rather disheveled this morning, or this afternoon, and it looks rather similar to a tropical wave here. But we do have westerly flow on the southern side according to these clouds moving out of the west here, and then easterly flow on the north side moving out of the east. So we do have semblance of westerlies on the southern side of the system. So there is a loose area of surface vorticity here, surface spin here, if you will, in this area of convection, but you can see a couple problems with the system on the western side here. You can see outflow boundaries extending out of, or being pushed away from the collapsing convection on the western side and northwestern side of the system. You can see those thunderstorms also collapsing here, and that is due to the continuing shear out of the southwest, now much lighter than it was in the past couple of days. So the convection has actually been able to center itself over the surface area of spin here, but we do still have a decoupled system as a result of the shear that has been plaguing the system for the past couple of days. If we look at the water vapor loop here, you can see we have our surface presence here, but we also have a mid-level presence here now over Cuba. This should actually fade away due to the fact that it is not associated with a ton of thunderstorm activity, and due to the ongoing surface convergence that is associated with the surface circulation here, this should eventually develop a mid-level presence and be able to redesignate itself as a tropical cyclone here. And so as this does, it will be coming north and will likely re-intensify into a tropical storm, and maybe a significant tropical storm here, not a hurricane by any means, but it will likely be able to reorganize into a significant weather event for the north central Gulf Coast here. If we look at the 5-day track here, you can see that because the system has translated itself west, remember yesterday the surface vorticity was somewhere in here, and we expected it to come up into the Florida Panhandle. That is no longer the case, as that surface circulation essentially died over Cuba, and we're left with the other area of surface vorticity off to the west here. And as a result, that track off to the north and west and eventually north has translated over. And so we are now looking at a system that is hopefully finally pinned down track-wise so that we don't have to make any significant changes to the rainfall forecast here and the impacts for the North Gulf Coast here. We have our area of uncertainty here now extending from the Mississippi Delta to the western Florida Panhandle here. And this may be able to reorganize into a pretty significant tropical storm here, as I mentioned earlier. If we look at the GFS model here, you can see that at the time of landfall, this is around 1 p.m. on Monday here, you can see that there is a lot of moisture associated with the system. You still have this kind of comma shaped with a lot of moisture being pushed northward, and that is due to the ongoing southerly shear that is going to continue here. We do have a stacked system and a mid-level circulation that is stacked over the surface circulation here. You can see the mid-level wind barbs lining up rather well with the surface isobars that indicate where the surface circulation is. And so it is an organized system at this point, and it is probably going to be a significant weather event sometime Monday for this area, and it really depends on where exactly this ends up. If it ends up on a further west track, it's obviously going to take longer to get to that point, so we may be dealing with this either Monday evening or Monday afternoon. and impacts vary depending on where you're at. If you're on the eastern side of the system's track, you're likely going to get the bulk of the heavy weather here, as indicated by this moisture field here. You can see all this moisture being funneled in to central Florida Panhandle region and most of Georgia and southeastern Alabama here. So if you're in this area, you do need to be watching for flash flooding and stay tuned to your local weather office for the latest regarding your area in terms of rainfall totals. And please do check the Weather Prediction Center for all the latest on what exactly the flash flood risk is for your area. I'll have the links in the description for both of those sites. Well, as we look eastward, you can see our tropical storm Grace here. As the sun is now setting upon the system, you can see a big blow-up of convection now associated with the very tiny surface circulation indicated by radar. Can't currently show you the radar, and I cannot show you the recon data either for some reason. So here we are with Grace. We have our system that is rather tiny this afternoon, and you have a pretty small circulation overall. You can actually see that this convection here to the south of the system is actually not associated with the main circulation. We have a very tiny, very tiny system here because the winds here should be westerly if you want a circulation to be broader, but you don't have that, and you have instead winds that are coming out of the south into the wave envelope. And essentially you have, we zoom out to the water vapor loop over Grace, you can see we have just a big moisture envelope here moving, and it's not very well organized. It's definitely more organized than it was yesterday. Remember, it was struggling to continue or keep convection firing over the system's center here, but now that is not the case. As we talked about, the mid-level shear has lessened and the easterly shear has lessened, and we're essentially in that time frame where the system's organization could really get going here because of the lack of negative environmental implication or environmental conditions for the system here. So we're in that time frame, and it has organized somewhat, and it is currently remaining kind of strong here. It's not really too impressive. It's still a 45-mile-an-hour tropical storm, but it is expected to continue strengthening all the way up until it makes a brush with Puerto Rico. It's still moving generally off to the west here, moving rather quickly, and it should be on the slowdown as it gets into the Caribbean here, and that should help the system, hopefully not too much though, because we did just see a 7.2 earthquake on the Tiburon Peninsula in Haiti, so we don't want this to really get too organized, and really don't want to see this actually impact Hispaniola at all, especially after Fred and after that earthquake. So let's pray that it does miss Hispaniola. But here's the 5-day track, which unfortunately does not show that missing at all. You can see that the 5-day track is now directly over Hispaniola, and we're dealing with two situations here, essentially. If the storm is stronger, if we go to the GFS model that this is the 12Z run, and we're going to show you the 18Z run too. This is around the time that it's interacting with Hispaniola. You can see that it's north of Hispaniola here, and we have a much more well-defined system, and you can see this is the potential vorticity. Essentially, the blue is anticyclonic, and the red is cyclonic here. And so you have the trough that we've been talking about here. You can see that the trough is just off to the west of the system and is imparting southwesterly flow over the system, shearing the system, and promoting a northward center reformation in the event of the system having troubles maintaining its circulation here. And that flow allows for the convection to continue to blow up over the northeastern side of the system, which would allow for a center reformation over this general area, maybe keeping it offshore here. That is a possibility. But we also have the land interaction that is ongoing, and it's a very small split here, because if it's able to remain north of the islands and maybe sneak a little north, it probably will maintain its circulation and be able to find more favorable conditions farther out to the west here. But we have a lot of hurdles for this thing to climb here, and the land interaction is definitely going to make this very unclear for the next couple of days. You can see we're still 2.5 days out from this system being able to become a little more easy to forecast here, if you will. And as we go forward, you can see that the trough actually ends up fracturing a little bit, and you have a lobe of the trough here and a lobe of the trough off to the north and east here. And as this continues into the Florida Straits, you can see that the trough no longer is negatively impacting the system when we have a strengthening system on approach to the Florida Straits here. Now, if we look at the 18Z run today, you can see that the exact opposite has happened with this particular run, and this is due to a very small track difference here. Instead of going north of Hispaniola, it goes over Hispaniola, and what happens here is the system essentially dies over Hispaniola here. You can see there's still, the thunderstorm activity is still pushing a bit on the trough, but the trough is still a lot stronger here and actually is able to completely destroy any hope of that exists for the system to strengthen at any point. And you see essentially the system is remnants at this point. So you have the trough here still blocking any future tropical cyclone from coming up. And you can see that Grace is over here in the Western Caribbean and not very well defined at this point due to the land interaction and the trough destroying the system essentially. So it's a very small track error. So if we go back to the 5-day cone here, if it slips north, it could also slip south. Don't get me wrong there, but that would also take a stronger storm because we're going to look at a couple things here, if you give me a minute here, that would maybe make the system miss the Hispaniola altogether on the southern side. But if we get north here, then it will likely maintain its circulation, be able to strengthen in this region here because the trough would get split and would not be as much of a negative influence upon the system. But if it goes over the land at any point, it would likely not survive. And the reason that the National Hurricane Center still has this is tropical storm strength and all of these points after the land interaction is because of the track error here. If it goes south, it will likely still be a tropical storm. If it goes north, it'll likely still be a tropical storm. But if it goes over the center of this track, good luck, Grace. So anyway, if we go to the GFS model here, give me a minute. We're going to go to the 500 millibar vorticity here. If we go back, let's go back to the 7 a.m. on August 17th here. You can see here's Grace getting destroyed by the island of Hispaniola. But if we look here, you can see that we have a mid-level ridge centered, and this is the mid-level ridge that we were talking about earlier with Fred here. This is still going to be over here, but you can see how it's oriented. It's mainly north to south and actually northeast to southwest here. And so you have northerly flow being put upon the system, and the lower level flow is predominantly out of the east here. So these are competing flows that will determine the track of the system. So if the storm is deeper and we actually get a stronger storm earlier, it will likely take this track over Hispaniola. But if it is on the stronger side, it could also just dodge Hispaniola. And that is a lower probability scenario, but due to the fact that we do have such a track error here and the angle of approach is so finicky here, we have to consider all three. And so if it were able to slip south, it would likely maintain strength here, and the trough, since it is so far to the north here and is only over the northern side of these islands, would not have as much of a negative effect upon the system, and the system would likely survive this trek through the Caribbean here, and we would be dealing with a system that is likely still intact as it approaches the Gulf. But first, before we even talk about any of that, we do have to clear all these hurdles that are in the way of the system in the near term. So we'll talk about that if the opportunity presents itself for the system. But other than that, that's all we got for now. I'm going to go back to the true color loop here and show you the tropics. We do have other stuff that is coming off the coast here. We may need to be talking about this in the next couple of days. Model support is generally increasing for waves to continue coming off of Africa, and maybe develop here. We do have several days before any of these become relevant threats to land. But for now, stay safe all, and thanks for watching.